welcome to this video on tension fatigue and romance in particular. I have done another video on tension fatigue and plot progression. You can check that out. There's a bit about romance there as well. But if you don't want to check that out, just stay tuned right here. Romance is a great way of creating engagement in the story. Romance is inherently interesting because humans are interested in romance, especially female audiences. But the problem with something that is such an easy hook is that it can be seriously misused. And we see this again and again and again and again in especially television shows, but also books, especially YA fantasy, that romance is just obligatory now. It must be there because people will not read something unless there's a romance in it, and this is just not true. And so romance is shoved into stories where it doesn't necessarily have to be, or stories with great romances are drawn out because we cannot allow the couple to end up together, because then who will be watching the show? Because the story will be over, right? Because all conflict ends once you find your smooshing partner, which, false. Not true. A couple consists of two people with flaws and problems, and there's going to be points where they disagree and grind against each other, not in the fun way, and where things are just going to be difficult. And these are interesting things to explore, but they're also difficult to explore, and so it's easier to just wait with letting your couple get together. The thing that can happen when romance gets drawn out so much is that the reader can experience something I call tension fatigue. Tension fatigue is the point at which a reader or viewer's yearning to know something in the story becomes so painful that they, as a defense mechanism, stop caring. This is a very exhaustive experience and will leave the reader ultimately dissatisfied with the story, even if they kept turning pages. As I said, the problem with romance, using romance as tension, is that the obvious thing to do is to either never let your couple get together, or let them get together but not really, or let them get together and then split them up. And this creates this exhaustive circle of will they, won't they, and ultimately, while you want to create something fun and something that feels almost like, they're destined to be together, what actually ends up happening is creating this frustrating relationship where it just seems like they can't stay away from each other, but they really should. They should, because they keep fucking up, and they keep fucking up because the writers keep writing them fucking up and having to split up. And so eventually, when they've split up for like the third time, it's like, well, maybe you shouldn't be together, Maybe you don't work together. One of the prime examples of this is How I Met Your Mother, where Ted spends so many seasons lusting after Robin and thinking she's the one. And then in the final 2 seasons, it gets really weird. And it does not feel healthy anymore. It feels like you really need to get over this, man. And then he does. He has this moment where he's like letting her go. It's actually very fun because she floats away from him like a balloon. And you're just like, well done, Ted. Nice. Now it's done. And then it's not done, because then like an episode later, you have this time skip episode, the mom dies, and then he ends up with Robin at the end anyway. And you're like, what? Didn't we just spend this entire series with him thinking Robin was the one, finally letting her go so he could be with the one who was actually the one? And then he ends up with Robin anyway. It made no narrative sense. And meanwhile, Barney and Robin got, and Monica and Chandler for that sake, these two couples both got to just slowly develop. Same thing happened with Blair and, I want to say Chad. That's not his name. The guy Blair and Waldorf ends up with in Gossip Girl. What is his name? The hot one. The bad boy. Robin and Barney get to develop this organic relationship where it just feels very natural. It was like once they put the two characters together, they just clicked. And I know the actors also had seriously good chemistry and kept, apparently the one who plays Barney, Neil Patrick Harris, right? He would flirt with Robin when they were off camera. So if the camera was on her and it wasn't on him, he would sit and be like, Of course, the actors' chemistry affects this, but the fact of the matter is that Robin and Barney just really worked. And both of the times that the show split them up, it just happened like that. There was no build-up. There was no real showing that they had issues in their relationship. There was a long period of them not having issues, and then suddenly it was like, well, there were issues, so they broke up. And I was like, what issues? We just saw them being this great couple. And that was all in the service of the Ted and Robin plot. And that was very frustrating because here you actually had a truly developing couple that was satisfying to watch, and then you broke it up, which is just to show how this idea that romance as a plot is the end-all be-all for a series is problematic, because it's not. And when you think that way, you can seriously screw up something that's working in your story. For instance, I felt like the Robin and Ted friendship died at the end, and it was just so sad because they were actually very good friends throughout the series, and then, yeah. If your story can only remain interesting by keeping the main couple from each other, your story has some serious problems. You need to strengthen your plot and put something more interesting in there. And we, as viewers, need to say enough is enough when this is happening. Like what just happened a few weeks back. Well, it just happened as I'm filming this, but this is going to come out a few weeks from now because I'm that slow at editing, and honestly, Twilight is not done yet at this point. So, in the 100, we have waited for so long for Bellamy and Clark to just realize that they are fucking in love with each other. And they had this beautiful dynamic of going from enemies to frenemies to partners in crime to best friends and becoming lovers and co-captains and co-leaders was just this last step. And I agree that we need more male-female friendships. And I get those people who wanted them to stay friends, but that was just not what they were for me. They had serious chemistry. And in the original books, they also end up together. So there was the groundwork for them to end up together. So that was so frustrating. And then what they did now, you know what, I'm going to spoil it for you because the series sucks. So Bellamy dies. And first they kill him off, and then he comes back, and then he dies again. And I'm just so glad that I stopped watching after 4 seasons. And I think everyone should have stopped after 4 seasons. I think that's when Lexa dies. Because they first did this with Lexa, and then they did it with Bellamy. And that show is so badly written, but it really does this again and again and again. It plays it with, it also did it with Finn. First it's like, Clark and Finn are gonna get together, we kill Finn. Lexa and Clark are gonna get together, we kill Lexa. Bellamy and Clark are gonna get together, we kill Bellamy. Don't fall in love with Clark. And so it just kept stringing you along and stringing you along and stringing you along. It was so painful. And it's very interesting to watch the threads on Reddit be like, people just hate this show now. They're still watching because you can keep watching something that's bad, something that is hurting you for so long because you used to love it. And it's this toxic relationship with a fucking television program. And we need to, as viewers and readers, be better at saying enough is enough. When a story is pulling this trick on us, stop watching it. Stop reading it. It's not okay. They're playing you, okay? The writers build up this really great story in the 100, and then it just fell apart because they were unwilling to go where the story was progressing. They were unwilling to actually do the things that needed to be done and just kept adding things for drama and for shock value. And these are also ways of creating tension, but ultimately they're not going to work when they're not grounded in proper emotional development. And so it's frustrating to watch. It's frustrating to watch because Bellamy and Clark could have become this great relationship where they got together and had to work on being together while also being leaders together and disagreeing about a hell of a lot of things, because Bellamy and Clark are often in disagreement, and that's what's great. They can disagree and still remain friends. So seeing them disagree professionally and remain intact as a couple without constantly being like, well, we disagree, so now we have to break up. That would have been an interesting development, and I don't think it's really been done on television before. Another story that played with the viewers' expectations of romance to its own detriment was Legend of Korra, because they knew that the Sotarians would be all over Mako and Korra. They knew that they did not have to build up a lot before people would just ship them. So they were an insta-ship. And the problem was that the writers didn't really truly properly develop Mako or the relationship. It just kind of was there. They were interested in each other because they were a boy and a girl, and that was it. And that really sucked. It sucked for Mako's character, it sucked for Asami's character, it sucked for Korra's character, it sucked for the viewers, it sucked for the story. And I think that that's why the story doesn't really pick up until season 3. Because in season 1 and season 2, it's so focused on Makora, and then they finally break up, and then we can get to the real stuff, and we can have the organic development of Korsami, which was a great couple and a great friendship. And then another example is the inheritance cycle, Aragon, as you might know it as. So in Aragon, the first book, there's this prophecy which says that that certain things will happen in Aragon's life. And one of them is that he will have a great romance with a woman of high birth. And we are very much led to believe that this will be Arya, the high-born elven warrior. I love Arya, and I really shipped Aragon and Arya, but it was so frustrating because in book 2, they actually had a lot of interesting development, but then they should have been allowed to Arya repeatedly rejected him because he was so much younger than her and didn't get the sorrows that she was bearing. And then it would have been really great to see Aragon mature and see them be together. What happened was that at the end of book 4, it's like they have this moment where she's become queen and Aragon is saying goodbye and he's going to fly off forever. And then, I don't know, do they kiss? They have like a moment. And then that's that. And I'm like, that's not a great romance. And this was another instance of giving wrong expectations. If that prophecy had never been there, this could have been a really great story arc. Because I never expected them to get together. I was never promised for them to get together. But I was promised at least something when I'm told there's a great romance. When you're told there's going to be a great romance, but it won't necessarily be positive or negative in its outcome, you at least expect that there's going to be something passionate there. But there was just nothing. There was a crush on Aragon's side, and then Arya at the end was like, "You're fine," and then he rode off into the sunset. So expectations, guys, are important, and paying off what you promise is important. Stringing people along is not okay. It's frustrating. When you play with fire, you might get burned. I talked about some other stories in the last video which all played with romance, and these stories all left me feeling very dissatisfied afterwards, and definitely not wanting to reread them and not wanting to make others read them with the fog of the air. As I was reading Cruel Prince and Wicked King, I was telling everyone, you should fucking read these. Then Queen of Nothing came along, and I have not recommended it to anyone since because I was frustrated with Queen of Nothing, and it did not give me what I wanted. So what can end up happening is that people will tear through a story in order to get their answers, but then when they get them and it's dissatisfying, or they get the answer they wanted, but they realize that waiting 8 books for these people to get together was not satisfying, you leave them with a feeling of being cheated, of just being fucking morons who was strung along and you didn't get what you wanted. You get angry. You don't want to rewatch it. You don't want to reread it. You don't want to tell others to do it. This is just, it's an easy cash grab in the here and now, but it's a bad investment in readers. So television shows and writers need to stop doing it. And it's difficult because you need to use tension. You need to create tension. You need to draw things out in a delicious manner. Sometimes it's nice to wait for things. But not forever, guys. Not forever. Drawing out a romance like this also has the problem that it doesn't just destroy your satisfaction upon reading it. It also destroys the couple. This is back to the Ted and Robin thing. Another very easy example is Ron and Hermione. I made a whole video on how I think Ron's character could have been better, so you can go and watch that if you want. But one of the points that I made was that Ron and Hermione should have started dating in about book 5 or book 6, and then have been together for the rest of the story. Then we would have seen them be together, we would have seen them work through their issues, and when we got to the end, they would have worked through their issues in ways that made us believe that they would stay together. What happens now is that Ron is a fucking doozy, and Hermione doesn't have a clue, and they end up together, and you're like, I don't see them staying together. Because J.K. Rowling kept them away from each other for so long, Ron ended up being a total douchebag, and it just didn't work. It destroyed the relationship and made me ship Hermione and Harry so much more, because their friendship was so strong, their chemistry was so strong, which is an interesting thing, that J.K. Rowling can write friendships very well, but cannot write romance for the love of me. Okay, so now we've talked about how to do this badly. Let's give some counter examples. Let's talk about when it's done right. And so it was very interesting, because before I read the 3 books that made me think about this whole tension fatigue thing, those were The Fog of the Air, Six of Crows, and Raven Boys. Before those, I read A Court of Thorns and Roses. I was wholly consumed by A Court of Thorns and Roses. And the interesting thing about Court of Thorns and Roses is that, spoilers again, Pharaoh and Tamlin are together in book 1, and then break up in book 2. And there are subtle hints throughout book 1 that Tamlin and Pharaoh are not a good couple. And it does turn out Tamlin is quite the abuser. And then Pharaoh ends up with Rysand instead. And you have through the entire book 2 this development between Rysand and Pharaoh, and you're constantly given little bits. And those bits are important. We're constantly moving further. And the reason they're not getting together right away is because Rysand does not want to push her, and Pharaoh is suffering from serious PTSD. But we know they're getting closer to each other, because as Pharaoh works through her PTSD, she becomes closer to him. So we realize that she has to get over her PTSD before they can be together. So you have this natural way of them not being together, and then at the end, they finally get together. So we're constantly satisfied throughout the story, but we also want to keep going. And I think that's the important point here. Tension fatigue happens when tension becomes so great that you do not want to be where you are, you want to be where you're going. Which is actually quite existential, right? It's kind of like when you're living your life and you're dissatisfied with where you are, and you're constantly thinking about where you want to go, and you kind of need to just be in the now and be like, yes, I want to get there, but I also want to be here. If you can get your life to that point, then you've achieved something really great, because then you're actually fundamentally satisfied with where you are. And it's wrong to think that if a reader is satisfied with the story and is happy while reading, that they will not continue to read. Why shouldn't they? They're happy reading the story, right? So keeping this balance between wanting to continue but also enjoying where you are is that's the key, finding that balance. And what A Court of Thorns and Roses also does is that in book 3 they are together as a couple. What I then think A Court of Thorns and Roses does wrong is that it so wants to hammer home the point that Rysand is the good choice and Tamlin is the bad choice, that Rysand is just perfect. And it's kind of frustrating, because you start out liking him because he's kind of bad, and then it turns out he's sugary good. And in book 3 they just have 0 problems. And I think that's very problematic, to create this idea that a good relationship has 0 issues, or that a story cannot have a couple be together, be healthy, while also working through some conflicts. You most definitely can. That's a little thing I'm dissatisfied with there, but ultimately I was more dissatisfied with that progression than the 3 others I have mentioned. For instance, with Six of Crows, I so want a story about Cass and Inish's relationship, how they will work with their different PTSDs, his phobia of touching other people, and her sexual issues because she was sold into prostitution. How would that not make an interesting couple to read? I don't know. Why not just put them together and let us see what comes out of that, because that's gonna be great. Vin and Eland in Mistborn are a really great example of a well-done couple as well. They get together in book 1, and then you see how their relationship progresses with all of its conflicts and stuff throughout book 2. And that's really great to see the relationship develop. Twilight. I can't believe I'm using Twilight as a counter here, because Twilight is a bad romance in so many ways. I mean, it's a bad couple, but the fact that they get together and you get to enjoy them as a couple is great. And I think the books do that well, and the popularity of Twilight is proof that you can have the couple get together and have them be together and people will enjoy it. New Moon, the book that does the thing where it breaks up the main couple and then lets them get together again, is the most boring book according to many people. I like New Moon for my own reasons, but a lot of people think it's the most boring book. And then in Eclipse and Breaking Dawn, they're just together. And there's not really any question of whether they're going to be together or not. And I like that. I like that about Twilight. I like that you rest within the fact that they're going to be together. Twilight then doesn't actually develop the relationship, but I like when you can rest in a relationship and be like, yeah, there are issues, but we're going to work on them. And I mean, that's like with relationships in real life. It's not good if every time there's a conflict, you're like, well, we should break up. Then you're not fixing things. Then you're not talking about things. You should come from a standpoint of, we can fix this, but there's an issue and we need to fix it, because otherwise we're not going to make it, but we can't fix it. You know, you need to have that confidence in your relationship. And of course you always need to be able to walk out, because otherwise you're in a codependent relationship. But being able to walk out if it's necessary doesn't mean that you're going to be thinking about walking out with every fucking conflict, right? The great thing about romance in fantasy is that fantasy is ultimately about something else, or at least I think it should be. There's typically a larger plot, and because there's a larger plot to carry things, drawing out romance like this to keep people engaged feels very hollow, because why? I mean, the world is already ending. I'm interested in that too. I don't mind to use the romance as a kind of breather. You know, let them have like this nice little moment. And if things are tough, it's not like it has to be sugary pink or anything. It's just like everyone's dying and we have this moment where we're holding each other and be like, the world is ending, but I love you. Like, you can have those kinds of moments too. But the great thing about fantasy is that as the main plot progresses, you can have the romance actually progress. You can have them end up together and be together throughout the story, and it's actually very appealing to watch, because it means that the main characters are going to be fighting together, developing their relationship while they're also fighting through the main story. So comment below about which couples kept you engaged in a story beyond where you should have stayed, beyond where it was satisfying to watch and you felt tricked. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, and stay tuned for the next video, in which will be the last in this series, where I'm going to be talking about point of view and how it can create tension fatigue.